mind-body problem poses the question, how does the mind interact with the body, and vice versa? In order to solve this problem, we must first define the terms mind and body. The concept of body is quite straightforward. It is physical, and it is how our minds encounter and experience the physical world. When it is said that people have minds, it is to say, they perceive, they have sensations, emotions, beliefs, thoughts, purposes, and desires. It is thought that the mind is a non-physical thing, a concept explored by Descartes. Descartes famously proposed that the non-physical mind and the physical body interact through the pineal gland in the brain. This was later discovered to be false, as the pineal gland is actually responsible for producing hormones. The mind-body problem is complex due to the fact that we are dealing with the non-physical. Occam's razor, a concept credited to William of Ockham, explains that a simple idea is more acceptable, sometimes even more accurate, than a more complicated one. With regards to science, this can be rephrased as when you have two competing theories that make exactly the same predictions, the simpler one is the better. This concept works in favour of David Armstrong, who proposes that we can give a complete account of man in purely physico-chemical terms. Why complicate the idea of mind with the non-physical when we can account for the mind's responsibilities within the body? Armstrong, among many other scientists, believes that central state theory can explain the human body and solve the mind-body problem. Central state theory posits that certain states of the central nervous system are, in fact, equal to the mind. The central nervous system includes the brain and the spinal cord. Looking at the technical side of the central nervous system, we see how it answers the mind-body problem. In the cerebral cortex of the brain, there are 4 sections, one of each on either hemisphere. Within each section is the primary cortex. For example, in the frontal lobe lies the primary motor cortex, responsible for making physical movements, such as moving your arm, leg, mouth, etc. The parietal lobe contains the primary sensory cortex, responsible for physical sensations, such as the roughness of a desk when you touch it with your finger. The temporal lobe contains the primary auditory cortex, responsible for processing sounds, such as someone yelling or music. And the occipital lobe contains the primary visual cortex, responsible for processing visual stimuli, otherwise known as what you see. You'll notice that this description of the brain covers the mind's responsibility of perceiving the world and covers sensations. If, for the moment, we take this to be all the mind does, then we have solved the mind-body problem. For the way the brain receives auditory, sensory, and visual stimuli, and the way it sends messages to your brain to move, is through the spinal cord, the other part of the central nervous system. Sensory neurons carry messages containing sense data from where it is sensed, for example, noise through our ears or feel through our skin, etc., up the spinal cord to the brain. Motor neurons carry messages, basically, of movement from your brain down your spinal cord to what you want to move. For example, if you want to move your hand to pick something up, motor neurons are sent from your brain down your spinal cord to your hand. However, this, as stated at the beginning, is not all the mind does. We still need to account for emotions, beliefs, thoughts, purposes, and desires. According to Candy Lawson, emotions originate in the brain, specifically in the limbic system. The limbic system is a small structure located in the middle of the brain between the lower center or brainstem and the higher center or cortex. The brainstem controls alertness and arousal and sends sensory messages to the cortex via the limbic system. Much of our thinking and learning takes place in the cortex. Memory, an important component of learning, involves the limbic system. Hence, there is a physical explanation for emotions and thoughts, and beliefs and purposes, since it can be argued that beliefs and purposes are an extension of thoughts. As for desires, research has shown that the neurotransmitter dopamine plays an important role in experiencing pleasure, which is directly linked to desire. Having made all these points on a physical account for the mind, it is important to acknowledge that, while much progress has been made and will continue to be made, A complete account does not exist yet. We cannot, for example, make an external representation of what someone is thinking. Another gap in the physical account is a concept known as qualia. Qualia describes the possible difference between one individual's experience of something and another's. An example, used by Thomas Nagel, relates to the flavor of chocolate. Suppose you and your friend each have a piece of chocolate. You would both agree that it tastes like chocolate, but what is that actual taste? How you experience the taste of it may differ to how your friend experiences it, and there is no way to know what the difference is, or if there is a difference. Although science can tell us the molecular structure of chocolate, and can show us the particular pattern of neurons firing in our brains when we eat it, it cannot account for the actual experience. It is important to acknowledge Armstrong's rejections of previous solutions to the mind-body problem, as stated in The Nature of Mind and other essays. J.B. Watson formulated a theory called behaviourism, which posited a more materialist view of man. Around this time, the mind was commonly thought of as a mysterious inward arena that lay behind and was responsible for the outward or physical behaviour of our bodies. Gilbert Ryle attacked this idea in the interest of behaviourism, saying that the mind was not something behind the behaviour of the body. It was simply part of that physical behaviour. Ryle claimed, as phrased by Armstrong, "Thought is not an inner process that lies behind and brings about the words I speak and write. It is my speaking and writing. The mind is not an inner arena, it is an outward act." An obvious objection to this theory is that there can be mental processes going on although there is no behaviour occurring that could possibly be treated as expressions of those processes. For example, a man may be angry but give no bodily sign. He may think but say or do nothing at all. To overcome this objection, the notion of a disposition comes into play. A substance such as glass has a disposition to shatter, or a disposition of brittleness. This disposition of brittleness means that given the right circumstances, the glass will shatter. This idea is used to counter the previous objection of an angry man not behaving angrily by saying that the circumstances were not appropriate or suitable for angry behaviour. This, however, is still not enough to satisfy Armstrong. As stated by him, "When I think, but my thoughts do not issue in any action, it seems as obvious as anything is obvious that there is something actually going on in me that constitutes my thought." Behaviourism denies this, and so it is unsatisfactory as a theory of mind. It is at this point that he says, thoughts are not to be identified with behaviour, we think. They lie behind behaviour. Another objection to behaviourism is the first-person account problem. That is, behaviourism is fine when looking at other people. However, in our own case, we seem to be aware of so much more than mere behaviour. This is because we are conscious, we have experiences. This is where Armstrong proposes that consciousness is the perception or awareness of the state of our own mind. It is this self-awareness that leads on to Armstrong stating that consciousness is a self-scanning mechanism in the central nervous system. Overall, Armstrong solves the mind-body problem very well. Having gone through his theory in depth, it may seem contradictory to Occam's razor. After all, talking about hormones, neurotransmitters, neurons, and dispositions doesn't seem like a very simple concept. However, this account does seem much more accurate than the non-physical concept of mind, that the mind does something somehow, whatever it is, wherever it is.